because there are those who have raised questions about his missing in action, especially during the demonstrations, that he has not been active for the last 2 or 3 weeks. What might be he up to?
Well, I know that Mombasa has actively led the demonstrations. As to Joho's absentia and the purported silence, I would not have, an opinion on that. But recently we saw him, one would think that silence, in politics, silence means, at the moment, silence means 2 things. You're either not with us or you're
you are contemplating crossing
you're
over.
contemplating crossing over. So there were talks and rumors that Joho would probably cross over. There has always been talks that Joho will cross over at some point. But I think the photos that surfaced on social media on Sunday of him and Junet, visiting the Right Honorable former Prime Minister at his current home,
yes.
was probably his way of saying that, guys, I'm still around. And remember that, when the campaigns started, he literally started, left Mombasa and came to begin campaigning in Nairobi. So, well, I cannot make anything of his silence at the moment. But we know that that NASA was to have a rally in Mombasa over the weekend, just before Jubilee went to Mombasa. So I don't know what led to the change of plans. It could be because, Jubilee was coming to pitch tent in Mombasa, and so NASA probably saw it was wise to wait for them to come and do their thing, then later, go back and undo what has been done.
Which perhaps is prudent in terms of managing their supporters, because then there's a likelihood if you have simultaneous rallies in that region, you're likely to clash sometimes.
Yes.
But then there's the question of Jubilee and the question of inroads, like we were talking earlier.
Yes.
And when President Uhuru Kenyatta began his tour of Mombasa, one of the things he realized is that Hassan Omar has crossed over to Jubilee officially.
Yes.
Because there are those who say that is not news. Perhaps he crossed over earlier, so this was just a confirmation.
Yes.
But we also saw Taita Taveta, former Taita Taveta County Governor John Mrutu crossing over. There were talks of Muhammad Ali being ambiguous in a way. The way he addressed the crowd is ambiguous. He's an independent candidate, or rather an independent lawmaker. So that those who even talk of Muhammad Ali crosses over from ODM to Jubilee, to Jubilee. Muhammad Ali is an independent candidate, so he's not affiliated to any party. But then, was he ambiguous? Did you find him ambiguous in the way he addressed the crowd?
At first, I was perturbed and shocked, just like everybody else. The same way I was shocked to see what's his name? The same way I was shocked to see Hassan Omar crossing over to Jubilee. I was not shocked because he crossed over to Jubilee, but I was shocked because just very few months ago, Hassan Omar was a strong believer in the fact that the government of the day, which then and still now is the Jubilee government, he's had very strong opinions about how the government has not cared for the people, has not done anything in the past 5 years, and has no moral authority to even run, in an election and claim to want to basically do better, yet they had done nothing. So he also has a history of having championed for human rights. He once served in the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, I think as the chairperson a few years back before he debuted, he embarked on politics. So being a person who has had a strong background in human rights, as a human rights activist, and a person who has strongly, severally condemned the government, and by the government I mean Jubilee included, it was a shock to me as a citizen to see him cross over. As for Muhammad Ali also falls in the same category of persons that have been seen to really stand against a lot of human rights violations and so many evils and scandals, exposing scandals that have gone on in the Jubilee government. I think Muhammad Ali literally made a name out of always reporting against government activities, and then he joined politics. So I was at first confused, just like everybody else, what is going on. And then I think I saw a post from one of the Jubilee legislators claiming that, Muhammad Ali was leading a rally, an anti-IBC rally, and then found himself, accidentally found himself in a Jubilee rally. So he later on came and clarified and said that, for him, given the heat, the current political heat of the moment, he just felt it right to prove to Kenyans that, you know, being an independent candidate, he can welcome anybody. So I think he was pretty much trying to tell us that if next time Raila decides to come to Nyali and being the, you know, elected member of parliament, he would gladly welcome him. So according to him, he said this country needs, I think he was pretty much saying that this country needs some level of tolerance where you can welcome any political, you know, side. And then he ended by saying that his allegiance is to his people, seeing that he was an independent candidate in the elections. So he says his allegiance is solely to the people of Nyali, and he wishes to see whichever government of the day deliver on what the Nyali people want. So,
but politically speaking, as much as they're independent, the question will be how independent are independent candidates? Because it's only a few days ago, and I remember NASA leader Raila Odinga going to Anniversary Towers.
Yes.
And Muhammad Ali was in his company during that particular you know, when they went to Anniversary Towers. Yes. And that tells you that as much as he talks of loyalty to the people of Nyali,
you can clearly see where his heart is, from his actions and his words. Well, I think most people say that, and a lot of people, other people are saying that, you know, don't expect, do not be shocked if Muhammad Ali finally decides to cross over to Jubilee, because anyway, many claim, and he personally also claims that ODM, during the nominations, party primaries, dealt him a big deal of injustice. So it's confusing, just like you say. I think I would want to take now the new position that it is a bit confusing politically to have you 1 minute, you know, working with the leader of NASA, and the next minute standing up in a Jubilee rally and saying, you know, tuko tayari, which is basically a NASA slogan, pretty much, yeah.
But if Muhammad Ali, if Muhammad Ali crossed over to Jubilee, for this it will not be surprising, considering the treatment perhaps he has received since the nominations. Well, for him, it may not be very surprising.
I think it would still be surprising in my opinion and view, because it would beg the question that then what exactly has he been standing for all these years? And I think that's where now the discussion on what kind of politics are we really playing in this country? Is it a politics of interests where I will sing the tune of whoever serves my interests best? And by interest in this case, I mean, you know, monetary interests. Or is it politics that is value-based, that is issue-based, that if I have been seen for the past 10 years, 5 years, standing for reforms, you know, championing for human rights, the upholding of human rights, then I should be seen consistently upholding the same, even if it means, you know, consistently living by that line of thought and school of thought and defending human rights consistently, and not, you know, the next minute siding with this very people I condemned as I was building my profile. So I think that question, Muhammad Ali would really need to think critically about the next move he's going to make.
But there are those who argue that life is about building bridges, that if we cross, if we don't agree today, that is not a prerequisite for us not to agree tomorrow.
I don't think it's a question of personal agreements and disagreements at this point. It is a question of personal convictions and what one stands for and believes in. If, let's say, for instance, today, as I am doing right now, I am a big proponent of women participation in politics here, in my organization, and I'm beginning to nurture young women to get into leadership. And then 5 years later, I'm given an opportunity to side with a political party that does not believe in women empowerment and that has consistently been on record for dismissing women, for pretty much not giving them the space or making it difficult for women to compete within the political party for spaces in leadership. I would be going against the very core of who I am, of what I believe in, and that's a discussion we need to begin taking, because if politics becomes, if we begin to believe in the narrative that it is all about building bridges and burning bridges, what we will be saying in essence is that we don't have room for values, we don't have room for strong opinions, we have room for, and in this case now, disagreements would be, if I don't agree with your philosophy, then tomorrow we can just wake up and say, you know, it was just we can build our bridge and forget about the fact that you're still a human rights violator, or forget about the fact that you're still a government that is corrupt, corruption that I have been preaching against, all my life. So we really need to start thinking about which direction are we taking as a country, and which leaders are we voting in as a nation. Yes.
Before we look at the tour of NASA leader, the foreign trip that is expected to be having, I don't want to believe in the United Kingdom or something.
Yes.
When you talk about Hassan Omar, perhaps crossing to Jubilee, and you say that got you by surprise.
Yeah.
First, because of his past record in terms of agitating for human rights.
Yes.
And then you talk about Muhammad Ali, and perhaps if time comes and all this talk about crossing over to Jubilee or not crossing over to Jubilee, what do we exactly mean? If you look at it from a broader perspective, does it imply that wherever is going, there's no respect for human rights? Is it a direct way of looking at it?
I don't think it's a direct way of saying that there is no respect for human rights. I think it's simply the discussion on, do we have leaders in the current society who are willing to stand for whichever values they have been standing for all along, even when their interests are not going to be served, even when they become, even when they're faced with the threat of becoming politically irrelevant, as many of them are threatened and told that, if you don't join our camp, you will remain politically irrelevant. Do we have leaders who will stand for the truths that they believe in to the end, when it does not serve their personal interests? I think the discussion now, the discussion really isn't about violations of human rights. It's about personal convictions and the ideologies that our leaders purport to stand for when it conveniently serves their interests. Yes.
Let's talk about the trip then by NASA leader Raila Odinga. Reports that he'll be leaving the country. I want to believe later today or perhaps this week. I'm not very sure if he left last night. But is it the best time to leave the country? So many people are asking that question out there.
Well, first, there's a lot of propaganda around his trip. We've had people saying that he's going away for 4 weeks.
Yeah, 4 weeks,
he shall come back. He shall come back after the election. Yes. We've had people saying he's going for a week. But I think NASA office clarified and said he's coming back on Friday. He's going for a lecture. In my humble opinion, I do not see a problem with him deciding to just go and give a lecture on democracy, because I understand it's around democracy and Kenyan elections, and just go and, in his wisdom, share his wisdom with the world. And if he's coming back on Friday, well and good, I think even if in my opinion, even if he decides to come back after the elections, it's his personal choice, it's his personal decision. He knows why he would take such a trip. He knows what mechanisms he would have in place. And the other day, I was having a discussion with my friends, and I was asking them, why is it that people who are begging Raila right after the election announcement of the first announcement of the presidential results, who are begging him to accept and move on, are now begging him to be part of an electoral process? So I think the country is just panicking for no reason. If surely NASA office says he's going to come back on Friday, there is no problem with him just taking a trip, going to share his wisdom and coming back to the country.
And when we talk about wisdom, the $1 million question that people are asking out there is that look at Jubilee, for example.
Yes.
They are in cost, making inroads, whichever way you look at it.
Yes.
But this gentleman, critics argue that he's not campaigning. We are not feeling him across the country.
But NASA has made it very clear that they have decided to take a break on campaigns and push for electoral reforms. And, the party came out very clearly and said that for them, the position and the stand is that, no elections, no reforms. Severally, I have seen the NASA party leader going for, interviews on TV, and he gets asked the question, so what do you mean by no elections, no reforms? And he says it's exactly that. If there are no reforms, the proposed reforms that NASA has put forth in the form of their irreducible minimums, then NASA is not ready and willing to participate in this coming, repeat elections. And in every sense of the word, I mean, if you are to participate in an election, the election was nullified on grounds that the election did not satisfy the principles of a free, fair, credible, and verifiable election. And a lot of, in as much as the Supreme Court had no authority to find individual persons culpable for the elections failing to meet the threshold of free, fair, and credible elections, then there are parties, NASA believes that there are parties who are responsible for the election going the way it did. NASA believes that IEBC was solely responsible and believes that certain changes have to be made for them to participate in another election. But and their reasoning is that why would they go back to an election on the same grounds? Why would they? It's like the proverbial way. It's the proverbial the proverbial proverb of doing things the same way and expecting different results. Yes.
But then there are those who will argue that since then, a lot has changed, perhaps, and Chebukati seems to be outlining measures. He has been outlining measures that he's taking to ensure that the election is held according to the judgment by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And in fact, the other day, he did unveil what others call his dream team for this particular poll.
Yeah, and so, he excluded...
Chiloba, among others.
Who NASA wants gone.
So
yes.
there are those who say that within the 60 days time frame, which is so limited, that the commission has done the best it could in terms of...
we need to understand that there was a tipping point of change when Jubilee came in with the proposed amendment. I mean, the proposed amendments to the existing electoral laws, and I have been keen on following NASA's statements, and in fact, in their very recent press releases, they have been keen on saying that they will not participate in an election now, given the fact that Jubilee has now brought on the table these new proposed amendments that are, in the very sense of the word, according to NASA, very unconstitutional. And in the very sense of the word, according to NASA, would actually lead to an even, lesser credible election than the last election we had. So I think it has moved from just being about the reforms that NASA would wish to see within IEBC and some of the changes they would want to see implemented by the commission, and then it has now moved to the question of this new, the proposed amendments that are now going to be tabled to Parliament, I believe, today by the Jubilee Party, that are supposed to, in the very sense of the word, change the game completely. Yes.
But then the argument that you cannot just have one party agitating.
Yes.
You are agitating for irreducible minimums,
yes.
But then the other one should just remain quiet.
No.
So this seems to be a brain game of some sort between Jubilee and NASA.
It seems to be a brain game, but I don't think it's a no-brainer to me, because I think one just needs to look at what reforms both parties are proposing, and also look at the same proposals in line with the judgment, the ruling that was given by the Supreme Court, as well as one also needs to look at the proposed amendments from both parties, the proposed reforms from both parties in line with the Constitution and the current existing laws and even the political temperature of the country at the moment. For instance, I believe in one of the proposed reforms that Jubilee is putting forward, Jubilee is saying that unlike what was existing in the Elections Act, the provision that only electronic results shall be relied upon at the announcement of the presidential results, and now including the manual system, and one needs to look critically at that particular clause that Jubilee is intending to introduce, this new clause that they're intending to introduce. One needs to just look back at 2007. The Kriegler report clearly stated that one of the reasons as to why Kenya got itself to the 2007 post-election violence was the disputed election, and the disputed elections were basically on the grounds that we used a manual system that was manipulated, clearly manipulated, and so Kenya went up in flames. And so, I think to NASA, such reforms, anybody in NASA would be thinking that why is Jubilee keen on taking us back to that time? Another proposed amendment that they are bringing forth is the reducing, the reducing of the quorum, the requirement for quorum of commissioners who can announce the election results. The law that as currently exists states that we need to have 5 commissioners for a presidential election to be you know, for presidential results to be declared. And now Jubilee is saying that, you know, you just need half of the commission, but not less than 3. So basically, Jubilee is saying that an election can be announced by a minority of the commission, which brings us to a situation whereby a commission can be divided into half, and you have half of the commission announcing results in favor of, you know, one presidential candidate, and the other half in favor of the other presidential candidate, you know. So,
but come to think of it, why should a commission be divided? An independent commission, as we bring this to an end, by the way, yes. An independent commission that took an oath of office to stick to the law.
Yes.
Why should you be divided as opposed to reading from the same script on a matter like managing an election?
I think the question of the independence of electoral institutions in Kenya is one that needs to be revisited, especially, you know, the independence of the elections of the IEBC is a question that needs to be seriously revisited. Going by what we saw in the last election, it seemed to be very clear, and it still seems to be clear, that, you know, the commission seems to be taking orders from particular individuals who we have no idea of verifying. Jubilee insists, you know, certain members of Jubilee insist that, you know, Chebukati, the chair, seems to be leaning towards NASA, and NASA insists that certain members of the commission seem to be taking instructions from Jubilee. We've even seen instances where particular members of the commission have been seen having secret meetings with, you know, lawyers of the various political divides. So when you begin to see such occurrences, then the question of the independence of IEBC becomes a very interesting one, you know. So you begin to wonder, is this really an independent commission in the sense of the word, that they do not bend to anybody's, they do not, you know, they did not jump or, you know, at any political party's demands, and that they can execute their mandate without necessarily taking orders from whether it is the government of the day, or, you know, without being twisted by the opposition of the day. So the question of the independence of the IEBC is still...
It's a matter that we should...
It's a gray area now.
Lawyers will say a lacuna.
Yes.
But this is a discussion that will spill over to tomorrow. I want to appreciate your coming this morning.
Thank you so
tomorrow,
much.
of course, you'll be together with Peter Bande.
Yes.
Will be joining us after that particular meeting somewhere, I'm told, in Narok. Ruth Ambogo, founder, Young Kenyan Women Leaders, speaking to us about some of the news making headlines in the country. And today we put women at the forefront, by the way. We want to have now some of them come and talk about their role, especially in peace building. This is critical because this country, if there's any time we need this kind of conversations, it is now as we go to the polls with this type of grandstanding between Jubilee and NASA. That discussion is coming up next on KBC Channel 1. The program is Good Morning Kenya, the only way to kickstart your morning. Stay tuned. This is the program you all long for.